days from now, would you be willing to trade all the days from this day to that for one chance, just one chance, to come back here and tell our enemies that they may take our lives, but they'll never take our freedom?
Anti-Tyranny News Radio here on UCY.tv. Thank you for joining me this evening. Oh, fire and fury comments that Trump had. Let's go ahead and hear what he had to say about North Korea.
North Korea best not make any more threats to the United States. They will be met with fire and fury like the world has never seen. He has been very threatening beyond a normal statement. And as I said, they will be met with fire, fury, and frankly, power, the likes of which this world has never seen before. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. North Korea.
Okay, we should be back. I'm not sure what's going on here. Skype is not playing nice with me today. Second and third time today. Just disconnected. We'll go ahead and dive back into this clip here.
Both sides are capable of doing that, and that's how people, miscalculate their enemies. It is one of the reasons why they end up on war. Oh, Owens might be nuts, but he's not suicidal. He's not going to do anything. And America makes too much sense. They're not going to just up and bomb somebody, and there won't be any major war. But then the miscalculation and timing gets messed up. So the danger is still there. But I think the overriding incentive to keep this agitation going is that people make a lot of money off this.
That's true. And we'll talk a little bit about profits being up, but maybe it's an idea to step back and look at the timeline, because these things are really presented in isolation. Something comes out and it's flashed across the media. But if you think about what's happened over the past week or so, the sanctions were passed in the UN Security Council, unanimously, of course. That would affect, I think, a third of all North Korea's exports. It's going to decimate the economy. That if it happened to the U.S. and a third of our exports were shut down, we would consider it an act of war. So that's what happened. And then after that, there was another North Korea test, which was a response to the sanctions. And then after that, which is what happened yesterday, what's got everything really in high gear, was an article by Joby Warwick in the Washington Post. Now, hopefully our viewers will remember the name Joby Warwick, because he's been involved in promoting war for the Washington Post for a long time. He was behind the Iran is building nuclear weapons. He was behind the Iraq is building nuclear weapons. He's one of the guys who does this for a living. He put out a piece in the Washington Post saying North Korea is able to miniaturize its nukes and put them on these missiles. You looked at the article, what's the sourcing? No sourcing. All anonymous sourcing from intelligence agencies. Breaking the rules of journalism 101. That got everything into high gear. That's when Trump went nuts and said he promised fire and fury on North Korea, the likes of which the world has never seen. And then after that, he sent some bombers up toward the Korean peninsula, to the Korean coast. The Japanese were involved, and then the North Koreans made a threat. Hey, we're gonna nuke Guam after this. So if you look at it in the whole context, then I think it has a different flavor.
Yeah, and it gets ratcheted up. And one thing that I was watching closely was the specific weapon, the THAAD anti-ballistic missiles, because that's where there's made a lot of money, and Lockheed is very much in lockstep with all of this. And of course, I shouldn't say anything about Lockheed and THAAD, because their home base is in El Paso, Texas. And but they have things all around. But they have promoted this, and this is part of the problem. They want to sell these things, and my estimation is the development is always so long, it's hard to track it. But there's some who estimate that we've already spent $40 billion on developing this, and now we are saying we will put them in South Korea, and we will charge them $1.5 billion. And the South Koreans aren't even anxious for it. They know they become more vulnerable. So we're antagonizing, behind the scenes at least, the people in South Korea. But what about China? Even if the administration wants to antagonize China, it doesn't make good sense, and and they're unhappy because these anti-ballistic missiles can be converted. If we put these right on the DMZ, we can also spy on the Chinese. So it's a threat to China as well. So these missiles are, I think, a big deal, and there's a lot of money being made. And when you go and look at all this and read all the articles, there's still an argument that they're far from a perfect weapon. They've been testing. They said 11 times out of 11 it was perfect, but it was all choreographed. Everybody knew what was going on, and the evidence right now is that probably they can go after one missile at a time. And if you're talking about stopping missiles going 50 or 80 miles, from North Korea into Seoul, which are going to be conventional missiles, this isn't doing anything. But the big thing is sell these weapons. Yeah. And guess what? Lockheed stock, who makes the missiles, their stock went up yesterday. And if you look at it in the last couple years, Lockheed, 5 years ago was $100. Now it's over $300. So they're doing well with this. And it looks like the fear of war and the fear mongering and the war mongering is good for war profiteers, and they're doing well, and the American people are made vulnerable. A lot of people have been convinced by this war propaganda, and in spite of the fact of all the lies about Iraq, there's still a lot of Americans say, well, this is different. This is different. We have to go after this madman because he can reach L.A. and Chicago and New York City with a nuke, and it just isn't true.
Well, I laugh a little bit because, Lockheed Martin did our computer systems when we were in your office on the Hill. And if they do their missiles anything like they did our computer systems, I'm quite worried about their ability to protect us. But, right, the profits are way up. Just since July 4th, 20% profits are up. So there's a lot of mansions being built in the Beltway. The U.S. government accounts for 70% of their revenue, Lockheed Martin. So essentially it is a government industry, but they privatize the profits, socialize the losses.
Yeah, and a super promoter of this weapon system is Mac Thornberry. He's the chairman of the Armed Service Committee in the House. He happens to be from Texas, and we do a lot of other weapon system in Texas. So it's political. Texas isn't the only state that benefits. Usually all the states benefit from war profiteering because that's how they can get all the delegations to go along with it. And it is the war mongering that goes on. And I want to call reference, and you probably have seen this on what Brian Williams had to say. We have the actual policies that are very dangerous, but then you have the marching orders for the establishment, and evidently they talk with each other or get the same information because whether it's a conservative TV station or liberal, they're all for this war, go on. But here's a headline. It appeared on Zero Hedge just a short while ago. NBC's Brian Williams, quote, "Our job is to scare people to death over North Korea." Do you think that could be a Freudian slip, or what's going on there?
Well, it's great for profits, And, I wonder, I think about the psychological impact of the bombastic rhetoric, the breathless articles that come out from people with a long track record of promoting war, and what it does to people. You get to the brink of a major war, and then it pulls back. Like today, Tillerson pulling back a little bit. And then maybe tomorrow, maybe next week, or maybe in 3 hours, it escalates. They're at it again. And I think it has a psychological impact on people. There's less resistance to actually going in. Look, we've had enough of this toying around. It's time to go and take care of it. And I looked at it at something that Donald Trump said in 1999. And he was condemning all the bluster and warmongering over North Korea. And he said, I would negotiate the heck out of it with these people if I were in power. 1999. So 18 years we've been terrified. He had the right idea then, but now all of a sudden it's something we have to face.
Yeah, but this thing's been going on since 1945, 1950, really. That's 60-some years, and there's more chaos than ever. This bluster and this bickering going back and forth, they say that Un is the one that's threatening. All he says is, if you mess with us, we're going to defend ourselves, and we're going to use all these weapons. But what a difference between what happens in the Middle East. And you have to think about this at least, because Israel, they don't brag about their nuclear weapons. You're not even supposed to know about them. Yeah. They have a lot of nuclear weapons, and they can defend themselves. So they don't have to come along with all this bluster and say to, any of those countries around there and say, don't touch it. They know, most of the Arab countries know they're not going to touch Israel. And most people know that Israel has the weapons. And most of the time there's no bluster, but subtly, there's a mess over there. But there's not this, the armies, the Arab Muslim armies aren't marching against the Israeli armies because that has been sort of settled. And you don't even hear this rhetoric. And you compare that to all this bluster and talk with this country that is not capable of lasting more than 3 hours. If there's a hot war breakout, we have the ability to silence them completely and totally, of course, killing millions of people unnecessarily, but it would be silenced in 3 hours, But still the bluster goes. That's why ulterior motives are important, and that's why I am convinced, and I'll bet you most of our viewers would agree, that there's a lot of profiteering in the war machine.
And you were mentioning before we came on, we were talking about one fellow who you say is essentially, he's the salesman for these THAAD missiles. He was a public servant for decades, right? We're talking about Bill Cohen.
Yeah, Bill Cohen, and I knew Bill. He was in the House. I believe we overlapped, and he went into the Senate. And good diplomat and conversationalist. He's not going to rant and rave and shout at you. He has a little different personality than John McCain. But nevertheless, if you look at his policy, he was very, very much involved in weapon system as the Secretary of Defense. And he has now, I guess it's been probably 15 years or so since he's been out of office. I think he was in the Clinton administration. Yeah. But he has a thing called the Cohen Group. Oh. It's the leading group of lobbyists for weapons system. And people like Lockheed Martin. So he has done quite well. And it just happened that this morning I heard him on an interview, which called my attention to this, because he sounded like a salesman. And he wanted to talk about THAAD, the anti-ballistic missile. And then all you have to do is Google that and look back, and his name comes up quite frequently for especially the last couple of years, because this has been only made at the THAAD anti-missiles have only come on stream where they think they could use them. But of course, like many weapon systems, just think about the F-35, how often they had it ready to go, ready and raring to go. But it would be terrible if we had to depend totally on the F-35. And so there's a lot of reservations about what the THAAD anti-ballistic missile system would do. But believe me, Bill Cohen would explain to you why it's a super defense system.
And the thing is, you're right. He's not a fire breather. He's probably not a nasty guy at all in person. But he's made fortune pushing fear. And the last thing he would want would be for the conventional wisdom to be, this is under control. There are talks going on between North and South Korea. This is ratcheting down. Maybe even we've accepted the proposal that the Russians and Chinese made, that North Korea has agreed to many times, which is that they would stop their testing if the U.S. and South Korea would ratchet down its military exercises in their backyard. That sounds like a reasonable deal. The Cohens of the world would not want that to happen. It's bad for business.
Yeah, but one thing that they have convinced, and I don't say this lightly because there's some evidence that Un is an unstable person. But if you look at it with all honesty and objectivity, I think it's hard to prove that, because he's one that's stirring up a lot of problems. But that doesn't mean that he hasn't told us the truth, and I just don't think it's in his interest. I don't think he's suicidal. He's not going to attack South Korea. Just remember the attack, the Korean War in 1950, was the North Communists invaded the South, which was defended by the United States. And of course, why I look so askance on this whole thing is one of the earliest, most significant events for the United Nations was 1950, where they quickly passed a resolution, and they quickly had us. It was only days that Truman had sent the troops over there, but he never went to Congress and said we should have a declaration of war. But that was the big event. The Organization Designed for Peace created and supported this war, and it's been going on ever since. And so I would say that people should question the authenticity of the United Nations as a peacekeeping organization, because there's been a lot of fighting going on since that time.
I'm not a psychiatrist or psychologist, but I think there's a very important psychological impact, and you see it every single time the war machine rears its head. You've got to call the enemy psychologically unstable, mentally unfit. They did it for Saddam. They did it for Gaddafi. They highlighted their eccentricities. And I think the reason they do that is you want to head off any move for negotiations. No, they're crazy. You can't talk to them. And if you can establish that in the minds of Americans, then they realize negotiations are pointless. We got to go straight to war. So he may well be as nutty as some people say, but I'm going to hesitate because I know this is a tool that's used to promote war.
And, along with that, the leader they go after and stir up the emotions, but they also have to demonize his soldiers, the people, and they do that as well. So you have to really hate to go and kill, because I don't believe we have a natural tendency that most young people want to grab rifles, go 6,000 miles away and start shooting people they don't know. So they have to know there's a vicious enemy out there. They have to be demonized, and the leader has to be Hitler, and then you can motivate them, and the truth is just beyond it. This is the way there's some reaction now toward our position that how can you say anything reasonable about this situation? Because, look, this guy's a madman, and he's going to bomb the United States. But that's exactly the same rhetoric we heard in 1973, and we're still in that country fighting war. So there's a lot of room for, a little bit of common sense. How do you summarize this, Daniel, on what's going on here?
Well, my parting point is probably a little depressing, but, the whole war on terror is based on a war against violent religious extremism. That's the basis of it. Well, here's Pastor Robert Jeffress. He was one of Trump's evangelical advisors. He spoke at the inauguration of President Trump. Here's what he said yesterday. In the case of North Korea, God has given Trump authority to take out Kim Jong-un. If that's not violent religious extremism, I don't know what is.
Yeah, religion also gets entered into the factor almost always. And then if there's a radical element of any major religion, whether it's Christianity, Judaism, or Islam, it gets painted with the broad brush. So everybody believes that. But I don't think Judaism or Christianity should be painted by some violent passages of the Old Testament. But they do use this, and religion is a powerful tool. So if you get the emotions of it, it was very frustrating to me during my campaign and fighting against going to war in Iraq, was that Christian evangelicals were not in my camp. They were very, very annoyed. Matter of fact, I could be disinvited to an event because I had these positions on foreign policy, and I shouldn't be invited. So that is the use of religion in a very sinister and evil way, and just to distort and gather the emotional support from the people. And that's what has to come eventually, because the natural tendency is not to go to war. Even in the first Persian Gulf War and the Iraq War, it wasn't like one day or two. It usually takes quite a few months. And I remember it took a good while to build up the animosity to go against Iraq, because it was removed a bit from 9/11. Going into Afghanistan, the emotions were very, very high, and the people responded rather quickly. Something had to be done. So, but it takes time. The people just get snookered into it, and they end up believing this stuff, and then it becomes their patriotic duty to be loyal to the war effort, and they actually get worse when the war breaks out, because then you can't even suggest there might have been a mistake by our own government. It takes a long time after the war, whichever war it is, breaks out, before it'll be even permissible to think something, well, maybe we made a mistake. But I believe in true patriotism. I think true patriotism should bring out our ability and willingness to challenge our own government when we know darn well they're wrong. I want to thank everybody for tuning in today, and please come back to the Liberty Report soon.
Oh, sorry about that. I had my microphone on mute, still talking. That was Ron Paul Liberty Report, RonPaulLibertyReport.com, and Ron Paul Liberty Report on YouTube. Check them out, subscribe. Now, I kind of want to get into my analysis on this. I think you have two elements. You have the Trump element and the establishment element. And if you look at Trump's remarks and the current state we're in globally, I think it was a warning to North Korea, but it was also secondfold a warning to China to get a hold of its region. And part of that plays into China and India being involved in basically a conflict of war right now. So you have China and India. And what I believe is happening is this is the way Trump is dealing with China. And if you look right now between naval, military bases, and airfields and air support, China is kind of, they're a little stuck. Now, when it comes to North Korea, I don't believe that they are wanting to actually attack the U.S. I think a lot of it is due to the history in North Korea when it comes to the Americans. And they are taught that Americans are occupying South Korea, that they, take the women and do what they want. Basically, Americans are savages, and that America has been trying to invade North Korea since the Korean War, and actually before that. So they're taught this. They're taught that we're just over there wanting to come in. So for him, it's part of the propaganda is saying we have the ability to protect you. We have it. We can take out the enemy. We can take out, and America is not the United States of America in North Korea. It's the Imperial States of America or something like that. But I think it plays into the propaganda. But they continue to develop missiles. They continue to do this. I think that's for the world stage. And that goes back to looking at every other leader that we went into the country and, had them overthrown and killed. Libya, Iraq. You look at all that. They didn't have nukes. How convenient. I think this is his way to ensure that they won't come into North Korea, that no, military action will happen in North Korea. If he has that ability, then less fear. But whether he actually has the capability to put it on a ballistic missile that can reach, to have it in that small package, I think is still, we don't actually have evidence for that other than one reporter claiming it. The other fold is if you're watching mainstream media, you're watching, it almost seems like they're ratcheting up a push for war and a fear. Now, as Ron Paul pointed out, really easy to sell weapons to countries if there's a fear. And I think he even goes beyond that to the point where, listen, we need a crap load of funding. We need to start more research. We need to get rid of stockpiles. And I believe it also is a way for the establishment to put Trump in a squeeze. Kind of edge him towards these type of conflicts and then criticize him later for it. Or like McCain's doing, criticize him now. But if this was McCain's idea, McCain, this is something that McCain would probably do. Just not in the way that Trump does. So we got this double fold. What could happen? I think that really we should watch what happens with China to really understand that. And I think that will end up playing even more of a part in all of this. Keep your eyes on China. Because whoever makes a move next, I think it's going to come from China. Not North Korea, not the United States, China. But that's my analysis. That's from people that have been in North Korea, and people from different types of intelligence that I listen to their analysis, and I've come to my own. And I think there's really, multiple layers to it. And I think Trump maybe used it as a pawn in this whole deal. All the blame will go to him, no matter how many other people were pushing false narratives. Where I think in history, there's been presidents that, in a way, they might have been a little bit of a pawn, but they were aware that they were being a pawn and they pushed their own agenda. Where in this case, I think Trump's going to naively be pushed this way. And if you look, he's been cut off from his inner circle. So that is very convenient. Okay, give me a second here. I want to play a short clip here from We Are Change, the biggest lie told to us about North Korea.
Now, it's not North Korea that everyone should be concerned about, but the oncoming war with China that should be on everyone's mind. And as the American war machine gears up with the help of the U.S. mainstream media, you won't believe the levels of propaganda and disinformation that's being sold to you that we will expose right now in this video.
With fire, fury, and frankly power, the likes of which this world has never seen before. Thank you.
Now, the last comment, the likes of which the world has never seen before, is very telling, since we know the capabilities and power of nuclear weapons has expanded tremendously ever since the first and last nuclear attack that was also carried out by the United States in Asia. Now, there is a lot of tough talk from Donald Trump, who, of course, is selling this potential war to the American public. And with the help of the corporate mainstream media establishment, people are buying it. And this leads to a very troubling development, not just for for us, but the people of the world. Now, the conflict between North Korea and the United States has been going back and forth for decades now. The latest string of events unfolded after the U.S. successfully passed sanctions against North Korea at the United Nations, which North Korea responded with, saying that they would have a thousandfold revenge against the United States for these sanctions. This is where Donald Trump responded and said not to threaten the United States as he threatened North Korea. And then reportedly, North Korea responded saying that it is taking seriously the consideration for a preemptive strike on Guam. This, of course, sparked the U.S. military to get ready. And even the official Twitter page of the Pacific Air Force tweeted that they are ready to conduct their bilateral missions with Japan and, quote, that the U.S. is ready to fight tonight. And now this is the very important linchpin here, because as this news was developing, supposedly new information came to light about how North Korea could be in possession of a miniature nuclear warhead that, quote, reached a new stage of their weapons program and would make it possible for the North Koreans to send a nuclear weapon to Guam. Now, it's important to note that this information is coming from the Defense Intelligence Agency, other known as DIA, that has actually released the same information on April 11th, 2013, when General Michael Flynn was in charge of that intelligence agency. And upon releasing this same information in 2013 under the Barack Obama administration, was immediately proved wrong with their report. And now the report saying the same thing that it did in 2013 has come up right now and is being used all over the mainstream media. Now, it's important to note here, the DIA, the Defense Intelligence Agency, has been previously wrong on other occasions. And they are known to have a reputation for being sensational sometimes and mostly pushing for more war. Just like as an example of, like they were proven wrong in Iraq in May of 2002. Now, it's important to note here, this report could be correct. I mean, the North Koreans did claim that they had this possibility themselves on March 10th, 2016. But overall, whether North Korea has these capabilities or not, it's irrelevant, because what ultimately matters is what the U.S. war machine wants you to think and how its actions are justified as they construct their narrative. We have to understand the U.S. war machine has an extensive history of lying, of using false flags, and using propaganda on its own people to push for more senseless wars that, looking back in American history, did not need to happen. And I know that's a very bold claim to make, but consider the fact that in the American mainstream media, you do not hear the fact that China actually proposed a double suspension to diffuse the rising tensions between Korea and the United States and offered up a deal to both countries that would make the North Koreans suspend its nuclear and missile activities in exchange for the United States ending their large-scale U.S. and South Korean military exercises where they do dry runs about destroying and bombing North Korea, which the North Koreans see as a provocation. Now, with China offering this deal up, North Korea actually agreed to these terms. Barack Obama was offered this resolution by China, and he said no. Donald Trump was also just proposed this resolution by China, and he said, hell no. The offer has actually been made and rejected 3 years in a row, 2 years by Barack Obama and now by Donald Trump, which, at least from my point of view, sounds like a reasonable resolution. What do you think? Let me know in the comments section below. But there's a reason you don't hear about this in the U.S. mainstream media that is hell-bent and has always been bloodthirsty for more war. Now, moving forward, it's important to understand, instead of just arrogantly dismissing Kim Jong-un as crazy or unstable, that it would be more beneficial to interpret his actions carefully and not just dismiss them arrogantly like the mainstream media has, so we get a full understanding and picture of what's happening here. Now, of course, this does not mean I support Kim Jong-un in any way, but that it's just important to understand his actions and why he does things to see the next moves that he will make. And even according to Trump's intelligence chief, Kim Jong-un learned from the case of Libya to never give up nukes. In 2003, Libya has announced, because of pressure from the United States and the United Nations, that they would be giving up their chemical, biological, and nuclear weapons program, which they did. And then in 2011, the United States and NATO bombed the crap out of that country, overthrowing the Gaddafi regime that previously complied with the United States, and then had him tortured and sodomized on YouTube. So from the North Korean side, it is only their nuclear weapons program that is keeping them safe from, of course, their own perspective. Now, a bigger issue here is, of course, North Korea's neighbor, China, which just moments ago released the statements saying that all sides, North Korea and the United States, should avoid any words, actions that might escalate the situation in Korea right now. And clearly they want both sides to cut it out, stop it, and do not support Donald Trump's plan to deal with North Korea, as Donald Trump has publicly complained about before. And it's not only China that is not on the side of the United States, but also Russia when it comes to this North Korean crisis. As we know, Russia and China, just of April of this year alone, sent troops to the North Korean border, fearing that Donald Trump would attack North Korea. China and Russia have also dispatched warships shadowing the U.S. military as they make their aggressive actions in North Korean waters. Russia recently has made public statements saying that they have given up on working with Donald Trump. They're making specific moves against the U.S. petrodollar, and along with China, do not see a common goal with the United States. Tensions between the United States, Russia, and China are higher than they have been in decades. Donald Trump has previously attacked China when he was campaigning to be president of the United States. He then walked back his comments when he became president of the United States, said that China was not a currency manipulator, tried to appease them, tried to work with them, especially on the issue of North Korea, and the Chinese have pushed back, which made Donald Trump frustrated once again, and then issue sentiments that he would do this with China or without China. The conflict in the South China Sea is also raising tensions between these two countries. China, of course, is increasing their military capabilities from new stealth fighters to ICBMs. They are readying their military along the North Korean border. And if you look at the bigger geopolitical picture here, they sure as hell do not want the United States meddling inside of North Korea. They have made that clear before. There's no interest to the Chinese to have an expanded military presence of American and South Korean forces right along their border, eliminating the buffer country that is North Korea that they love and they hate. There is no win here for China if the United States decides to attack North Korea. Only a sign of aggression that, of course, the Chinese and the Russians will not appreciate at all, and the chances of them responding with their own military action keeps increasing as the time goes by. And all of this could have been prevented if the United States would not do practice bombing runs of North Korea. But they don't. And people really need to ask themselves, is North Korea really a threat to the United States? And what are the bigger motives here? As we know, wars have only boosted presidential approval ratings. And for Donald Trump, that would be a win since they are at an all-time low right now. He's being advised by people like Henry Kissinger, a bloodthirsty warmongering globalist who would rather see the failure of the Iranian state than the rise of the Islamic State and ISIS inside of the Middle East. He has other globalist and Bilderberg members like McMaster around him that have previously been backed and worked with his enemy. And if we look at Donald Trump's foreign policy, there is no care and consideration for the life of civilians. There is no moral compass here. There is only an agenda that has been followed through previous predecessors before him that is only being continued and perpetrated in a very disturbing way that can only be stopped with real news and information. Now, don't let fear win during these tense situations. Share this video to get the truth out to the American people. And just so you know, as of today, I pretty much lost all of my YouTube income as YouTube just demonetized my most viewed 660 videos. So your support and participation on wearechange.org/donate are more important than you know right now. I hate asking you guys for help, but at this time, I really don't know what to do forward, and I will make a new video explaining the situation in full in just a few hours. Subscribe, stay tuned, love you.
We Are Change on YouTube, and definitely wearechange.org, because demonetization really sucks. I think a lot of people in alternative media have experienced that. Now, what we're looking at, I really don't know, because it matters how much the establishment can motivate Trump, whether he buys into certain things or not. So where we go in this whole foreign atmosphere, I can't speculate, but I think it will be economical first. I think you will either see China and Russia do something to try to hurt the dollar, or they'll back away from hurting the dollar, which I think that might be part of the strategy behind a lot of this. I just think there's a lot of talk behind it more than anything. But we are going to go ahead and move forward with some other information. Again, I think a lot of this comes from a witch hunt, and it's multi-layered too. I think part of it's trying to shake Trump up or put pressure on Trump. I think a lot of it comes from the establishment and the left. And it's really coming to a crazy head right now. I got one right here. FBI conducted pre-dawn raid on former Trump campaign chairman Manafort's home. FBI agents raided the Alexandria home of President Trump's former campaign chairman late last month, using a search warrant to seize documents and other materials, according to people familiar with the special counsel investigation into Russian meddling in the 2016 election. Federal agents appeared at Paul Manafort's home without advance warning in the pre-dawn hours of July 26th, the day after he met voluntarily with the staff for the Senate Intelligence Committee. The search warrant was wide-ranging, and the FBI agents working with the special counsel Robert S. Mueller III departed the home with various records. Jason Maloney, a spokesman for Manafort, confirmed the agents executed a warrant at one of the political consultants' homes and that Manafort cooperated with the search. Manafort was or has been voluntarily producing documents to congressional committees investigating Russia's interference in the 2016 presidential election. The search warrant indicates investigators may have argued to a federal judge that they had reason to believe Manafort could not be trusted to turn over all records in response to a grand jury subpoena. It could also have been intended to send a message to President Trump's former campaign chairman that he should not expect gentle treatment or legal courtesies from Mueller's team. A lobbyist and political consultant in the 1980s, Donald Trump's former campaign chairman Paul Manafort worked with the international clients that included two dictators who were then allied with the United States. The documents included material Manafort had already provided to the Congress, said people familiar with the search. If the FBI wanted the this is a quote, if the FBI wanted the documents, they could just ask Manafort and he would have turned them over, said one advisor close to the White House. Josh Stuev, spokesman for Mueller, declined to comment, as did Reginald Brown, an attorney for Manafort. Mr. Manafort has consistently cooperated with law enforcement and other serious inquiries and did so on this occasion as well, said Maloney, the spokesman for Manafort. Mueller has increased legal pressure on Manafort, consolidating under his authority a series of unrelated investigations into various aspects of Manafort's professional and personal life. And that's what I mean by, there's something behind this, because this is beyond just investigating Russia. Mueller is using this as an opportunity to politically and using law enforcement and the courts to harass people around Trump. And right here it says, Mueller has increased legal pressure on Manafort, consolidating under his authority a series of unrelated investigations into various aspects of Manafort's professional and personal life. It says here Manafort's allies fear that Mueller hopes to build a case against Manafort unrelated to the 2016 campaign in hopes that the former campaign operative would provide information against others in Trump's inner circle in exchange for lessening his own legal exposure. The significance of the records seized from Manafort's apartment is unclear. And you can read the rest of that, and that is at WashingtonPost.com. So that's what it looks like to me. I really think it's more of harassing, making someone's life unbearable, and trying to put people in a box so they have to cave to that side. I do have a clip here. Andrew Napolitano on Fox News talked about the Manafort raid. So we'll go ahead and dive into that.
Agents raided the home of former Trump campaign manager Paul Manafort late last month. His spokesperson says Manafort has consistently cooperated with law enforcement. And the FBI, while not denying that raid, declined to comment, as did the Office of the Special Counsel. Well, they say that they cannot comment on open investigations. I understand that. Let's do this in reverse order. Let's go back to the top of the story if we can. And this idea of sending notes through your counsel to the person who's looking into the investigation.
I think that the president has stopped his rhetoric of referring to the special counsel investigation as a witch hunt because his lawyers have persuaded him that that's counterproductive.
Why?
You are taunting FBI agents who have the power to make your life miserable. Don't do it. Let me, his lawyer, deal professionally with them. I will tell them you appreciate their work. And when they want documents, they will call me up and tell me what they want, and we'll give it to them. So that level of professional cooperation is what normally exists when the FBI is investigating someone in what we call white-collar crime, meaning crime without violence. But these two things are connected. The realization by Donald Trump that it would be better for him to cooperate than condemn the special counsel, and a pre-dawn FBI raid on the home of someone represented by competent counsel. To lawyers, it's very telling. When you want evidence from a drug dealer, you go to a federal judge at 3 a.m. and tell them there are the drugs. If we don't get it in the next half hour, they're gone.
Let me step in and slow you down for just a second, because if people are watching, they may not have seen the segue there, and I want it to make sense to the audience. So you've got separately now the president then doing what you say you should do, and that's smooth over the waters. You don't want to have to go after or appear to be going after the counsel.
Right.
Let your attorney do the job. Separate from that, though, we learned that, late last month, pre-dawn raid on Paul Manafort, who played a pivotal role back in the campaign days for then-candidate Donald Trump.
So the fact that Paul Manafort is represented by very competent counsel tells me that an FBI agent or team of agents went to a federal judge and persuaded the federal judge there is probable cause of crime in the place to be searched, his home, or the things to be seized, computer data and documents. And we don't trust him to give them to us, and we don't trust him to preserve them, or his own lawyer is telling us he can't control his client. That is very damning for Manafort and for the president. And it comes at the same time that the president is starting, I better take this more seriously.
And you know what? I think the president also understands the cost-benefit analysis. And if you say to him the political cost may be greater than whatever benefit you might gain from going after special counsel, although it may feel good at the time, although you may feel justified and you may feel completely right in classifying it as a witch hunt, it could do so much damage to you personally that it's not worth the immediate political
Listen,
gain.
I have issued so many search warrants. When they come to you for a search warrant, they have to tell you they can't get this by any other means, and it is likely to be destroyed or removed, and we need this awesome power, literally breaking down a door of a white-collar person with guns at 5:30 in the morning.
Yeah.
We need this awesome power, and we need it now. That tells me there is a there.
But the question, Judge, then is what exactly are they looking for? Is this simply into Paul Manafort's personal dealings, right? Maybe there's some financial fraud they're very concerned about.
It has nothing to do with the president.
Right. But that's where a lot of people are taking this, whether that's fair or not. Are they going to find some collusion when he was campaign manager?
No, what they are going to do is put
Russians?
pressure on the president's friends, right?
And we heard that, right? Didn't we hear that they were trying to turn Manafort and force him
Here is
out
their
through
technique.
some of the leaks?
They will indict Paul Manafort for something irrelevant to the campaign and the Russians, and then squeeze him for what he knows that they can use against the president.
I think that there's a big separation between what's happening in the investigation with Paul Manafort. He's been dirty dealing in Eastern Europe, in Ukraine, and Russia for a very long time. I'm not so sure that they'll even find a connection to the president. We'll have to use him as leverage because the White House has repeatedly said, Trump's counsel has repeatedly said, there's nothing there. I think that this raid absolutely has to do with Paul Manafort and his personal problems with the FBI. One thing I want to say real quickly on the Bob Mueller stuff, I think that Bob Mueller's a professional, and regardless of whether the president is praising him privately through an attorney or whether he's berating him publicly through Twitter, he's going to do his job. The facts follow them, or they
He's going to do his job, and he's going to justify his job.
And we are still getting plenty of leaks.
So that was Andrew Napolitano's take on that. Now, I think Mueller will, use something else. I don't think there is any Russian connection, but he will pressure as many people using the FBI to get information. Anything that might point to there being a Russian connection. And what he'll do is he'll find other legit means. Oh, you did this wrong or you did that wrong. Oh, there's a crime. And he'll do it to every single person in the inner circle if he needs to. And what's the saying that, everybody commits at least 3 felonies a day or something like that? I can't remember the exact number, but there are so many laws on the books that, people commit crimes every day without ever knowing it. So then to turn around and use, the judicial system and all that to bully people for information, that's pretty devious. That's should be morally wrong, I believe. It's one thing to catch someone doing something wrong. It's another thing to start putting all kinds of pressure by trying to look at any type of crime that they might have committed just to pin them down to get information. But, that's something you also see in a lot of big city policing. They will turn people into snitches that way. And I say snitches for the simple fact that, not saying that those people are wrong. They're being pinched by the system. If someone is smarter than them, they will find other people around that can be their eyes and ears. And because enough people commit crimes every single day without ever knowing it, it's not too hard. And if you allow the political correctness in, guess what? It's only going to get harder. Harder to avoid committing some type of crime. Go ahead, pit political correctness. And you don't think there's enough people in prison yet? Start making laws against, things. Oh, it's not politically correct. You can't say that. That kind of segues into something else. I'm sure a lot of people have already read it, so I'm not going to read the memo. You can find it everywhere on the web right now. The Google engineer that put out a memo, just saying how they felt, and being Google, well, they're pretty open about how they feel about a lot of things. Well, apparently not what he thought or believed, only their viewpoint, their very liberal leftist viewpoint. So you don't want to have any type of conservative viewpoint, but really too, this gets down to, you can't analyze things if it comes out to the wrong thing. Hey, that kind of sounds like global warming. Oh yeah, but James Damore, he was fired by Google. He finally speaks out. This from Stefan Molyneux. I'm probably not going to play this whole clip. I do want to get into a couple other things, but again, this is James Damore speaks out. So let's get into it.
And Molyneux from Peter Main Radio. Hope you're doing well. So, a lot of times on this show, we talk to people you already know or who have been in the public eye to one degree or another for a substantial amount of time. This conversation is going to be a little bit different. We're talking to James Damore. Now, James is the writer of the memo that has been characterized as critical of diversity, despite the fact that James repeatedly insists he's very pro-diversity, that erupted and over the last couple of days has caused quite a firestorm across the internet, on television, on radio, and so on. And I did a video response to it recently, and after I put out the video response, we found out that James had been fired from Google. So we wanted to talk to James, I wanted to talk to James to find out what it's been like and what his thought process were in producing this article, this series of arguments, and what the response has been like, and what it's like to be in the very center of one of these highly controversial but absolutely necessary conversations that society needs to have. So, James, I really, really appreciate you taking the time today.
Yeah, thanks.
Now, your thought process. I know that you had complained in the past to a labor relations board about what was going on in your work environment. But I also know that you've been a researcher at Princeton, at Harvard, at MIT. You got a master's degree in biological systems and so on. Can you just give us a sense of your intellectual growth towards the memo that was recently, I guess, elevated to center of the firestorm status?
Yeah, so I guess in general, I just really like understanding things. And recently I've, through interactions with different people, I've noticed just how different political ideologies sort of divide us in many ways. And what I wanted to understand what was behind all of that. And so I read a lot into Jonathan Haidt's work and a lot of like what is actually the philosophy behind all of these things. And that led me to at least the beginning of the document.
And what was it in the writers that you read at Haidt, I think it was, that you found sort of the illumination moment, the moment of like, aha, this is going to make some of the jigsaw puzzles fit into place?
I guess just I could see that all of us are really blind to the other side. And so in these environments where everyone is just in the same echo chamber, just talking to themselves, then they're totally blind to so many things. And we really need both sides to be talking to each other about these things. and you trying to understand each other.
Because you had a very interesting critique at the beginning, and people will link to the full document below, and I'll talk about how shameful it was that so many outlets said, well, we've edited the document a little bit, and we've removed some charts, and one of the major media outlets had removed all of your sources and said, it's curiously unsourced. It's like, oh, come on, you've got to be kidding me. This isn't even close to believable. But you had an interesting critique of the left and the right, neither of which are particularly satisfying for a sort of fleshed out philosophy of the world. I wonder if you could go over that sort of briefly and give people your thoughts on the strengths and weaknesses you see of these two political paradigms.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I guess some of the easiest ways of understanding, say, the left is it's very open, it's looking for changes, and while the right is more closed and wants more stability. And there's definitely advantages to both of those. Sometimes there are things that you need to change, but you also need a vision for what you actually want. And there's a lot of value, for example, in tradition, but not all traditions should be how they are, And,
I sort of get a sense like, sort of ancient classical Chinese civilization that was like the same year after year, century after century. Sometimes it seemed like millennia after millennia, versus really, really chaotic times like the 1960s, where there seems to be like a real pedal to the metal kind of gas acceleration of change to the point where people can't even keep up and cultures can't adapt to it.
Yeah. And what I found also very interesting was that these create biases for ourselves. And so this is particularly interesting when we talk about how it relates to reality. And so both sides are biased in certain ways, and they have motivated reasoning to see what they want out of a lot of things. And so this happens a lot in social sciences where it's 95% leaning to the left. And so they only study what they want, and they only see the types of things that they want, and they really aren't that critical of their own research as much as they should. And you can go.
No, go ahead. I'll hold my foot.
And so the popular conception is just that, the right doesn't understand science at all, and it's anti-science. And it's true that they often deny evolution and climate science, or climate change, but the left also has its own things that it denies. So biological differences between people, in this case, sex differences.
What was it that you saw? So you started in Google at 2013, and just sort of geek to geek, I wanted to get a sense of how you'd gotten so much into computers, how you learned how to program, because of course your degree wasn't in that. Where was it that you first developed this sort of talent or ability with computers, and what were your first impressions in 2013 when you started as a software engineering intern?
Yeah, so I never really was a science or a computer science major. As a kid, I made computer or calculator games, but that was just
like
for
all
fun.
the women I knew.
But I guess I got into chess, and so that was a couple years of my life. So I was doing anything related to computers. And how I actually got into Google was I found these coding competitions. It's just, these puzzles that you have to solve within a certain time. And I did well enough. I made it to the semifinals or something for Google's, and they just recruited me out of that.
Right.
And Google obviously is, a dream job. They have huge benefits, and so I was happy to go there. And Google has always been I love Google. So, Android. I was always an Android fanboy and stuff.
Now, when you started to work at Google, and I spent a lot of time in the IT world. I've been an entrepreneur in the IT world, hired a lot of coders. And one of the things that I've noticed, and tell me this is purely anecdotal, right? That we want to draw a line between the science we'll be talking about in a bit and just the anecdotal stuff, James. But for me, the engineers who worked most closely with the code, and particularly like the base layers, right? Like not the user interface stuff and all that, but the real base layers of the software. A lot of them tended to be more conservative. And I have this sort of vague association in my brain. Tell me if this accords with your experience or not, which is that when you're working deep in the bowels of the software, it's like, it better work. You have to be objective. It's all factual. You can't will anything, and you don't have to worry about people. Like the user interface people, they're always like, well, what would the people do, and how would they swipe, and what would they do, and so on, right? And I think that there may be an association between software engineering and conservatism because you're dealing with logic, facts, reality, that if an evidence-based argument comes along or a really tightly reasoned argument comes along, because of all of the training that goes into and all the experience that goes into dealing with facts, reality, and evidence, and the empirical question of does it work, is it faster, is it more efficient, does it use less memory or whatever, have you found any association between software engineers and conservatism? Is that somewhat boxed into my experience, or is that more general, do you think?
So at least personality-wise, one of the two biggest differences between the left and right, the left is often more open, so openness to new ideas, and so that's why often academia is so left-leaning, but the right has higher conscientiousness, which is also very useful. So I guess in this very low-level type work where you're just debugging all the time and you really have to persevere to get these things going, that would be something that maybe more conservative people would excel at.
Yeah, I mean, I know what you're saying about the openness of the left. You know, in my experience, I mean, I went to a bunch of Canadian universities. A lot of them were kind of on the left, as was the theater school that I went to, in my opinion. I didn't find them to be particularly open to non-leftist ideas. So, you know, like, hey, this helps us accelerate the leftist agenda. I'm really open to it. It's like, wait a minute, this evidence-based, science-based argument retards the leftist agenda. I must attack and destroy it using ad hominems. I don't know that it's openness as a whole, because openness as a whole, to me, comes more out of people who just sort of reason and evidence-based. There is like, okay, well, if this is what the reason and the evidence is, I guess we have to go that way. As scientists, to me, tend to be more open, but they're open with standards. Whereas the left seems to me more open, like, cool, enthusiastic, advances our agenda. I don't know. Like if you say, well, Google is a company that, you know, it's dominated by leftist politics, really open to new arguments, new ideas. It's like, well, you did put out this set of arguments. And they did not appear to be overly open to it.
Yeah, I think that's partly just a symptom of the echo chamber that we were in. And so if we were in a more understanding environment where the two sides actually talk to each other, then hopefully at least they would be more open to ideas that run counter to their internal morals.
And when you were there, or in the, I guess maybe the Silicon Valley culture as a whole, I mean, I know there are conservatives. I know there are non-leftists, you know, in the same way, you know, like to me, if you look at a picture of like a, I don't know, like a frat or a school, a university, an all-male university from like 100 years ago, you know there are some gay guys there. You know that for a fact, but they're just, you know, they're kind of underground, they're in the closet and so on. Is there a significant proportion, do you think, of people in Silicon Valley who are not on the left or who are skeptical of the left, but who really keep themselves hunkered down and silent because of a fear of this kind of backlash?
So, yeah, definitely those aren't on the left feel like they need to stay in the closet and not really reveal themselves and actually mask and say things that they don't believe. I think one thing that maybe, and I haven't really looked at this too deeply, is that there are a lot of libertarians, so which would be sort of independent of the left and right, because at least according to Jonathan Haidt's work, the libertarian mindset is actually very logical, and so which would fit with coding.
Yes. No, and I think, you know, for me, when I first got into philosophy, I loved the logical rigor of it. And when I first became aware of, I mean, I always kind of knew this in science, but in philosophy, that evidence really matters. And you don't just sort of come up with all these theoretical constructs and impose them on the world like a cookie cutter, like, you know, this idea, well, communism is just this way, it's right, we're going to impose it no matter how many bodies pile up. Once I kind of got how important evidence was and became a real empiricist, to me, the coding that I did was sort of logical and empirical. The philosophy that I did was logical and empirical. The show that I run now, I work as hard as I can to be logical and empirical, though it is tough sometimes when it goes against your pre-existing ideas. But there does seem to be, I think, kind of I guess, a meeting point or a synchronicity between libertarianism and coding, which is interesting because I do get a lot of social justice warrior vibe coming out of Silicon Valley. And to me, it's almost like, okay, well, libertarians and rational people have created all this cool economic productivity. And now the company is so wealthy, it can afford to hire a bunch of social justice warriors. And then things go from there.
Yeah. And I mean, there's definitely some, I think a lot of the entrepreneur mindset is sort of libertarian, just, self-reliance. And I mean, Peter Thiel is libertarian. I don't think Sergey Brin, our co-founder, has really declared himself one way or the other, but I've always interpreted the things that he said to be very not partisan. Like, he's always wanted the two sides to talk to each other, and he's very unpolitically correct in a lot of the things that he says. So, yeah, I think that he may identify as libertarian, but
and it's interesting
does not want to say it.
Yeah, well, I can understand why these days. And particularly, as you get big as a corporation, Microsoft had this issue. IBM, it was brutal. I think it was in the 80s that it started. IBM, one of them say, Microsoft just kind of took PC-DOS away from IBM and ran with it. Yeah, but one of the reasons for that was that IBM got dragged in by the Department of Justice into like this 13-year soul-crushing battle of antitrust prosecution. And boy, that's going to people just don't want to work there. Oh, I'm going to spend the rest of my career in depositions? No, thanks. I think not. And this, when you get to be a big enough company, I criticize Google for some degree. I also fully am sensitive to the reality that they're living in a kind of hair trigger, lawsuit happy Department of Justice. I mean, if Clinton had gotten in the business environment, I mean, she wouldn't be repealing like 16 to 1, like for every, like Trump had this thing, like for every new regulation to have to be canceled. He was like 16 to 1 or 18 to 1 cancellations to new. That wouldn't have been the case if Hillary had gotten in. And you do, as a big company, have to live in this highly litigious world. And I mean, there's a lawsuit already going on against Google for pay disparities and so on. So it is a real challenge to operate in that kind of environment. And you don't want to get sucked into one of these like endless legal actions, in particular, if it's Department of Justice based. I mean, they'll just drain your will to live if you're a big corporation. So I am sensitive to the fact that when you bubble up something like this, and we'll get to the thought process in a sec, if that's all right with you. When you bubble up something like this, they have to look at that in a sort of big legal picture framework and say, okay, well, how does this position us with this, that, and the other, and all the other things that could possibly go on? And it may not be a decision like your termination may not be solely related to, well, this is just bad thinking, we got to get rid of this guy, but there may be very big concerns, which, maybe you or I aren't particularly aware of.
Yeah. For sure, Google is under a ton of pressure on multiple fronts and throughout the globe. So it definitely complicates things.
Yeah. Now, what was your thought process around this? I wish I had the right word for a change here. It's been called all these, nonsense screed. It's like it's an essay, an argument perspective. But I think an argument is better because it's tightly reasoned. It's got lots of source notes and so on. Did you have like that Jerry Maguire moment where it's like, I'm going to write this thing, or was it just something you're making notes for yourself and you built the case and you thought, well, this is important to share? What was the process of generating the arguments?
Yeah, I went to a diversity program at Google, and it was all, it wasn't recorded at all. It was totally secretive, and I heard things that I definitely disagreed with in some of our programs, and so I had some discussions with people there, but there was a lot of just shaming and no, you can't say that. That's sexist. You can't do this, and like there's just so much hypocrisy in a lot of the things that they're saying. But so I decided to create the document just to clarify my thoughts, and also I had to fly to China for work, so I had a 12-hour flight to fill my time with. So that was one motivation.
Right. And then did you have a sense beforehand of, I mean, obviously you knew it would be controversial and so on. And controversy to me is fine. You know, people advance like arguments I consider mental half the time, you know, as a public intellectual or whatever. Yeah. And sometimes they pan out and sometimes they don't. I sort of try and be open to these kinds of perspectives. So I guess you were aware of the controversy. How did it play out relative to your expectations?
Yeah, I guess this is going back to some of how each side has blind spots. And this was definitely one of my blind spots. As, you know, a very logical person, I laid out my arguments. I specified exactly what's causing this. I even outlined what the response may be, you know, all this PC silencing. But they did exactly that. So I couldn't really get ahead of it at all. And so I did share the document multiple times, like a month ago, and many people looked at it, but no one ever had this explosive reaction. All the responses were just rational discussion.
Right. So you shared it internally, and then would you know how it kind of got out and metastasized from there, like escaped and supernovaed from there?
Yeah, so there were the people writing on Twitter, and they were all against it. They were just calling me, you know, all these misogynist, racist terms and stuff. And so I think they got in contact with Gizmodo, I think, maybe, hypothetically. And then it was likely from there that it was leaked. But I'm pretty sure it wasn't anyone connected to me because they would have asked me first. And they wouldn't have removed all the citations and messed up the formatting and stuff.
Right. No, they really did take it from what I thought was, you know, a fairly academic, very professionally put together set of arguments with extensive citations and graphs and so on. And you know, the thing is, too, like I mentioned this in my sort of video response to it, James, it's like you put a lot of qualifiers in there. A lot of, you know, okay, these are group averages. You can't judge the individual. I mean, all the things that rational people have to say because nobody seems to get taught about statistics or anything like that. But, you know, like women in general are shorter than men. Oh, so you're saying that no woman can be taller than a man? It's like, no, I'm not saying that. Oh, please. I wish that government schools were better. But it is. And I remember when I first heard about it, I thought, okay, I'm going to read about this. And when I started reading about it, James, first of all, there were no quotes. And when there's no quotes from the document, I know it's reasonable. Usually, it's like, well, we can't quote from it. We're going to give you our interpretation. And then I found it really hard to find the original document, like what you'd actually written. And then I thought, oh, man, okay, this is going to be really reasonable now. This is going to be really evidence-based. This is going to be really factual. And then I finally found one, and they said, well, we've made some edits, and we've taken out some charts. And I'm like, what? Why are you hiding it? If this guy's crazy, just let the crazy speak for itself. And then I finally, like, it took forever, finally found one. It's like, here are the sources, here are the charts. And I'm like, damn, this guy's really reasonable. This is important stuff for us to be talking about. This is science. This is factual. And according to Breitbart, there are 4, I think, psychologists or sociologists or some combination who've said, yeah, the guy's science is bang on. This is well accepted within the psychological community. This is well accepted within the biological community. This is well accepted products of evolutionary psychology and evolutionary biology. This guy's science is bang on. I haven't seen any actual scientist or any of the people you've cited say, no, he got this. He's misusing my work. He's got it totally wrong. All the professionals, all the people who actually study this stuff, they're like, yeah, this is, he's right. You know, I don't agree with everything he's written, but as far as the science goes, he's bang on. And this, to me, is the really surprising thing, because people are characterizing what's happened to you as you've been fired for having an unpopular opinion. You've been chastised for having an unpopular opinion, for being anti. But this is not an opinion that you have, right? And I wonder if you can help people understand that disparity, because it's one thing to be fired for being unpopular. It's another thing for being fired for being right and having the science on your side. That, to me, is truly astonishing.
Yeah, I don't really understand it myself yet. I mean, a lot of it is just people got offended because it goes against the left's ideology. And then they just, okay, it offended people, therefore it's wrong. and therefore it's an opinion because it can't possibly be true if it offends me. I have my own subjective truth or something. I don't know. But
it is terrible how also people weren't, from what I could see, the people who were the most offended were the people who had not read what you'd written, but the people who had read these exaggerated, doomsday, apocalyptic nonsense interpretations of what you'd said. You know, you didn't say women are biologically unsuited to be in. I mean, none of the things that were actually in the document. And that to me is, you know, if there's I have this special circle of hell thing going on in my brain these days, you know, who belongs in what special circle of hell? People who exaggerate factual or mischaracterize factual empirical arguments to attempt to goad the mob into the most virulent and vicious hyper-reaction. There is a special circle of intellectual hell for those people because they're stifling an absolutely necessary debate about these issues in society.
Yeah, I think a lot of it is that they feel self-righteous, and so they feel that the ends justify the means. But it's really bad, I think.
And what's it been like for you? Again, most people will probably never go through this eye of the hurricane storm trial by fire. Hey, good pressure turns coal into diamonds. But what's it been like for you? I mean, is it hard to sleep? Is it hard to concentrate? Is it like, welcome to a side of the world you probably didn't know about really very much until now, and now it's all too vivid?
Yeah, it's definitely been hard to sleep. Especially early on, I was responding to comments from people in Australia and Europe. So I was staying up until like 5 a.m. But it still hasn't truly hit me, the enormity of it all.
Well, it's interesting as well, because the stuff that I read at the beginning was, and I thought this was also a very strong reaction. This man's life is destroyed. And I don't think that's true. I don't think that's true at all. And in fact, I know that we'll talk about the job office in a second, but you know, you've just set up a giant flare saying, I have a lot of courage. I'm willing to stick by the facts. I'm willing to take a hit for science. I'm willing to take a hit for reason and evidence. I'm willing to take a hit. Now, whether the hit was entirely anticipated, the extent of the hit was entirely anticipated, nonetheless, you did release something that you knew could be explosive and controversial, and you're not backing down, and you're not groveling, and you're not like, sorry, you know, it's the Galileo thing, you know, but it moves. But it moves. What do you want me to say? The Earth is not the center of the universe, but it moves. You can't argue me out of the facts. I mean, I could pretend, but what's the point of that, right? And so you set up this giant flare, which says, like, I value truth over comfort. I value reality over conformity. I value science over, you know, I can't believe they call your stuff pseudoscience. It's like, no. Diversity is pseudoscience. The actual, like, diversity is a strength. Diversity is a benefit. Please show me the studies where this is absolutely proven to be the case, right? Diversity is not a benefit in neighborhoods. I can't find evidence that it's a benefit economically and so on. But nonetheless, you set up a giant flare and people will see that and tell me what the response has been that has been a positive, that has been encouraging.
Yeah, so it's surprising. There may be a lot of negative responses in the public, but very few of them actually send me messages because they just want to, you know, virtue signal to all their followers that, hey, I'm a great person. I share your morals and this person is bad. But they don't want to actually have a debate on why I'm wrong or even confront me. They just want to show how self-righteous they are. And so in contrast, I've gotten a ton of personal messages of support, which has been really nice. And I got that before at Google before all of this leaked, where it was a lot of the upper management that was shaming me.
Right. Well, I mean, I do think that it is a real shame now because, of course, a lot of people are going to look at your example and say, well, I can't talk about that. Well, I can't talk about this and so on. And, you know, I have no criticisms about anything that you did with one exception, James, is that I would say that what you should have done is activated your super secret white male patriarchy shield. You should have activated your privilege shield so that you would sail through this immune from all negative repercussions. Because this kind of stuff, you know, when it happens, is like, white privilege. There's guys like basically dragged out into the street, beaten senseless in the court of public opinion, and then fired within 48 hours or something like that of this becoming public knowledge. I don't see a lot of white male privilege rising up around him like these magical shields to protect him. In fact, the white privilege seems to me, or white male privilege seems to me, to be an excuse for people to say, well, I can bully this person because they're so privileged. Anything I say is always punching up. So it seems like white privilege is kind of the opposite of privilege, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, there was a surprising amount of attacks that were just at my race and gender, which is exactly what we're trying to avoid with these things, right? We want to avoid classifying people just by their group identity. That is racism. That is sexism.
Now, I wonder if you could just step people. We're going to link to the full document. I want people to read it. You need to read this document. It's a great document. It's well put together. It's well sourced. But I know not everyone's going to do it. I mean, I wish they would. I want them to. I know not everyone's going to do it. I wonder if you could just step people through some of the major points that you want to get across for people who aren't going to end up reading it. Because, again, I thought it was very thoughtful, very reasonable, perhaps too reasonable, very, very conciliatory, and it comes, I think, from a genuine passion for excellence for all parties concerned.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I guess one caveat, what I would say to anyone is that I'm not talking about any individual person. I'm not talking about reducing anyone to their group identity. I'm just saying that if we look at population level distributions, different groups have different distributions of traits, right? Just as we can say that men have a higher distribution of height than women, for example. And so this isn't important in judging any individual person on how good they are at a job. In fact, I'm not saying that any of the female engineers at Google are in any way worse than the average male engineer. I'm just saying that this may explain some of the disparity in representation in the population, right? So there may not be so many over here, but those that are over here are just as good. So, or not even good, like ability-wise, just preference-wise with a lot of things. The personal difference between men and women is just differing interest in people versus things. And this has links to prenatal testosterone. And that explains a lot of the differences in career choice. For example, teacher versus something like coding, where one is more people-oriented and one is more things-oriented. And yeah, so that's the biggest one that I would say. But then there are some other personality traits that at least have some effect, or at least we should be cognizant of. And maybe if we want to make tech a more female-friendly environment, we should recognize that some women are different than men in these ways. And so if we want to make it more accessible to women, then maybe, for example, cooperativeness, which is higher in women than men, we should make the workplace a place where you can actually thrive if you're cooperative. So a lot of coding now is just very individual. I'm writing my code and I can be a superstar. I can just write my code for a week and then make this huge system all by myself. But there's ways of pair programming, for example, or just other collaborative things that we can really help improve the workplace. And, it would just help good for productivity, maybe. And also in our interview process, for example, it's all individual right now. And it's only how well you work by yourself. And we never really measure how good someone is on a team, which is really important to how good you perform at your job. And so that may also be disproportionately hurting certain populations.
And you had a great argument about status as well.
Yeah.
I wonder if you could refresh people's minds if they haven't read it, or if they have read it and don't remember, I'm not going to read it. That's a great argument you had there.
Yeah, so the drive for status is one also difference between men and women, where generally men try to compete in high risk activities for the possibility of having high status, where status is often just a lot of money. And that also pushes a lot of men into dangerous and otherwise unseemly jobs that, like coal mining, that are extremely dangerous but pay more than the equivalent job for your skills. And so that may be what's pushing some men into CEOs and other upper management, where, I personally wouldn't want to be a CEO. You have to work so long, right? And for what? Like,
bye, kids. I'll see you when you're 18.
Yeah. I actually want to have kids and, have a family life. I don't want, having millions of dollars, but no time to yourself. And that's not a good, fulfilling life, at least for me. And so that may be why there are more men in leadership, for example, or politics even.
Well, and of course, way back in the day, vastly more women reproduced than men. And so the advantages for a man of taking risks, like if you didn't take risks, your chances of reproduction were very low. If you took risks, then you had the chance to reproduce. And it was, I can't remember the numbers, it's mental. It's like a dozen to one women or men reproducing, or even more, 16 to 1. And so you had to take the risk. It's sort of like if the plane's going down, you're going to have to jump. You don't want to jump, but you know for sure if you go down with the plane, you're going to die. And so taking risks for men was often the only way to get access to reproduction. And so the positive selection there genetically will be that the men who take risks are going to end up reproducing. So you're going to end up with that as whereas women didn't have to take the same number of risks because the ratio was so different.
Yeah, so I think it's actually just 2 for 1. So we have twice as many female ancestors as we do male ancestors. But maybe in certain environments, it's much more skewed, like the Genghis Khan in China. I'm sure he had thousands of wives or whatever.
So we're not going to talk about legal options. Because, if we start talking about legal options, all the lawyers are going to be like, ooh, what did he say? What did he say? I do want to mention this. I know you do have some legal options regarding this, but we're not going to talk about them in any detail. But, I think that what you did was very brave. I think it was necessary. I'm sorry for the price that you have to pay. It is tragic sometimes when we look at the fact that there are biological differences it's like the new Copernicism. It is just one of these things that used to be kind of understood non-scientifically. The science is racing, in a sense, to catch up, but there's a lot of barriers in the way. People don't want this stuff to be studied at all. And I'm sorry that you have to take this kind of pay this kind of price for it. It's tough in the moment, but, you really have something to be proud of in the long run, I think. Yeah. I know you've got some great job offers from some great people, which I think is very encouraging. But I also want to make sure that people understand.
Okay, I'm going to end it right there. That was Stefan Molyneux. You can check out the rest of that, Stefan Molyneux, on YouTube. And that was Google Memo, Fired Employee Speaks Out. It's really telling what he perceived the left as and what happened from the left. And then to perceive the right a certain way and to see that the right reacted another way. Now, that could potentially, turn around the moment that the left acts a stereotypical way. Or the left acts a stereotypical way. But, it was interesting when he talked about libertarianism. And I told someone that, I said, the reason I have a libertarian view, I've come to look at reality, just, what truly is. And the arguments for things, and then looking how those things have already progressed through history, and the outcome from these. And, they said, well, you need government, you need police officers. I said, I believe in, people being able to be protected and protect themselves. I said, but I really kind of, I don't see, I understand in today's terms what, why there's law enforcement and the continued push for law enforcement, but I think it's counterproductive. I don't see it. I know in a perfect world, but we don't live in a perfect world. But my belief is that, government has, continued to make law after law after law. Law enforcement has enforced those laws time after time after time. I said, what do you expect law enforcement to do for you? Well, to protect me and my property. I'm like, okay. And your wife and your children, right? Yeah. Okay. I would just look at the laws that have been passed and the increased number of law enforcement, and I would make the argument, have they stopped rape? No. Theft? No. Murder? No. Have they succeeded in stopping drug use? No. Have they succeeded in stopping anything? Well, no. Okay. Have they contributed to any of these things? Well, yeah. Okay. So logic says it hasn't helped. It hasn't succeeded in the intended goal. And if anything, it has given a lot of those type of people and it's not all law enforcement, it's not all government employees. It's really categorizing, but saying that even with the good, that it's not succeeding in stopping the other without, at times, it might have stopped someone occasionally, but a lot of times these are also done by abridging others' rights. And so you might have stopped this one thing, but now you've contributed to a number of other things. And then, again, that immunity type atmosphere that surrounds government and law enforcement. And we've seen that with all the corruption. So it's hard to ignore that. Now, with this James Damore from Google that wrote this memo, if you listen to him, he's very logical in his thinking. And I think the way he thinks about things, I think he will become more libertarian just because of how he analyzes things. And I found this throughout a lot of people that, are freedom lovers or libertarians. And I'm not talking about, I'm a Libertarian Party member. No, I'm talking about libertarian thinking. I found them to really just kind of look at things in a real logical way, and also being able to go, but that doesn't mean that that's always how it is. Just because government is corrupt, law enforcement is corrupt, doesn't mean all law enforcement is corrupt, all government is corrupt. But it does say something for the whole that it does not work. Are there things that maybe you see in law enforcement or you see in government that in your hands might better protect you? And I'm not talking about, these crazy weapons. I think domestically, I think that we can better govern ourselves. I think with the state of the world, I don't know if we can do it in a national defense. I don't know if there's enough consensus about anything to be able to recognize a threat. But that's, history has shown that. You can look at Hungary, back during Nazi expansion, and they were ready to surrender to the Allied side, but then there was a coup. Why? Because there were people that believed in what Hitler espoused. But the others that didn't were the ones that were in power. They try to, ally with Hitler, hoping that would save their country. When they recognized that it was a bad idea, they wanted to surrender to the Allies. And the other party that aligned with Germany said no and forced a coup with help of the Nazis. But we have to start somewhere. I think we have to start reversing back towards a smaller constitutional government, and work towards that individualism. And that was something that James even talked about was, even in the memo, it really espoused that we really have to look at the individual, not the group thought. But this might explain why maybe there's not enough women engineers. Your problem might not be that you're not getting enough in. It's just there's abundant male coders and not so many female. So that's what there's reasoning behind it, and it might be instinct, just how nature is. But to go, this is what the statistics are. This is what, history is shown. This is what today shows. It's just fact, and that's wrong because it doesn't meet political correctness. It doesn't go along with the narrative. And to get fired for that, to just put down facts and explain it and go, but we should look at everybody as an individual. So the female people doing what I do as a male are just as capable. They're just as capable. But more women are not attracted to this type of work. They might want to work where they interact with more people. Lots of people. They want to be, you tend to see more female bartenders. Not that there's not a lot of male bartenders, and the male bartenders are good at what they do. But you tend to see more female. Women tend to like to interact with people, and intelligent women tend to like to interact with people more, where you get a lot of intelligent guys don't want to interact with people too much. But that's only a broad look at it. The individual is different. And that goes for culture, that goes for religion, that goes for every aspect of life. The individual is what you should focus on. And we should focus on us as an individual, govern ourselves. It makes it harder for the government to intrude. Don't feed into what government needs to have to grow. and start getting people definitely at the local level that won't stand for it. Your sheriff, your county council, city council, all of that. And that's only a move towards freedom and liberty. It's not the ultimate goal. But can we even make it there? Can we even get to that point where we can look at the Constitution and go, yeah, we're not too far from there, because it seems that we're going farther away. But I say look out for the next generation. I think they're already fed up with the PC and political correctness, and at the same time are very accepting type people. They're kids, young, accepting, but also, tired of the whine. It's pretty bad when the younger ones are tired of the crying, the whining. Okay, guys, we are coming up to the end of the broadcast here. I don't want anybody to forget to go to ucy.tv. Scroll down to the bottom. You got an Amazon button. Now, you also can donate. There's a donate button. If you shop Amazon through ucy.tv, when you click that button, it'll take you right to Amazon. You get the same great prices, same great shipping rate. And at the same time, UCY gets a little kickback to help cover operating costs on their end. And it's a great way for, it's a win-win. Again, no higher prices, no more, shipping. But UCY gets a little kickback. And go to antityrannynews.com/MyPatriot. Check out My Patriot Supply. They got great non-GMO seed vaults, and they also got, a little bit of other prepping gear like survival food. Go check them out. antityrannynews.com/MyPatriot. That helps, cover the operating costs on my end, which seem to just continue to go up and up and up. But we're doing okay over here. I definitely urge people to support alternative media, definitely when the mainstream media has been and will continue to be a mouthpiece for the elites, the establishment. UCY gives you very different opinions from many different hosts, but we're all trying to advance the knowledge and the idea of freedom. So, stay tuned here on UCY.tv for the great broadcast coming up after this. And don't forget UCY.tv. Scroll down the bottom, click that donate button, that shop Amazon button. Take care.